Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into a hypothetical scenario that'll make your current sleep situation feel like a five-star resort. Imagine, just for a moment, that soft pillow under your head isn't a pillow at all, but a hard, scratchy tunic, and the gentle hum of your fan? That's the distant, ominous clatter of a Roman centurion's marching boots. You're not tucked into bed. You're standing barefoot on cold, damp earth, the chill seeping into your very bones. The air isn't filled with the scent of your clean sheets, but with the acrid tang of wood smoke and unwashed bodies. You've just been recruited, though kidnapped might be a more accurate term, into the mighty, terrifying Roman legions. Forget your phone, your comfy pajamas, your Netflix queue. All of that is gone, replaced by a wooden cudgel and a stern, unshaven face bellowing orders you don't understand. And trust me, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're listening, drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where you guys are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're a civilian, minding your own business, perhaps tending your small plot of land or selling wares in the bustling forum. One moment, life is predictable, if not always easy. The next, a burly Roman legionary, or perhaps a recruitment officer with an unsettlingly calm demeanor, claps a hand on your shoulder. You're told, not asked, that you are now a soldier of Rome. This wasn't a job application you filled out. It was an impressment, a sudden, brutal wrenching from your previous existence. For many, especially in times of crisis or for those living in newly conquered territories, this was the grim reality. You might be a farmer, a fisherman, a potter, it doesn't matter. Your skills with a plow or a fishing net are now irrelevant. Your only skill, they tell you, will be fighting for Rome. The initial shock is probably immense, a cold wave of dread washing over you. You've heard stories, of course everyone has, whispers of distant campaigns, of battles fought and lives lost. But those were just stories, tales told around evening fires. Now it's your story. You're ushered into a line with other bewildered souls, all looking as lost and terrified as you feel. They might give you a quick, rudimentary physical examination, probably just a glance to ensure you have all your limbs and seem capable of standing upright. Forget modern medical checks or psychological evaluations. If you can hold a sword, you're in. Historians still argue whether this impressment was the primary mode of recruitment for all periods, or if voluntary enlistment played a larger role in stable times. But for you, right now, it feels very much like compulsion. You're immediately stripped of your civilian clothes, your comfortable, familiar attire. In its place, you're handed rough, itchy wool, a simple tunic, and perhaps some basic sandals. The individual you were just moments ago begins to fade, replaced by a faceless cog in a vast, merciless machine. There's no warm welcome, no orientation packet, no meet the team barbecue. Instead, you're subjected to immediate, ear-splitting shouts from centurions who seem to exist solely to intimidate and break you down. They don't care about your family, your dreams, or the life you just left behind. To them, you are raw material, something to be molded into a weapon. This sudden immersion into military life is designed to be jarring. It's meant to strip away your individuality, your softness, your resistance. You're no longer you with your own thoughts and desires. You are a recruit, a potential legionary. You're told, in no uncertain terms, that your life now belongs to Rome. Your days of sleeping in, enjoying a leisurely meal, or chatting with friends are over. From this moment on, every minute of your waking life and probably a good deal of your sleeping life will be dictated by the Legion. You might even find yourself wishing you'd paid more attention in that one history class where they talked about Roman military service. Although, even then, the reality would be far worse than anything a textbook could convey. Remember that quirky tidbit about Roman soldiers sometimes being paid in salt? Well, that's not exactly going to buy you a lavish retirement villa, is it? It's just enough to make you salty, pun intended, about your new career path. The language barrier, if you're from a non-Latin speaking province, would be another immediate hurdle. Orders barked in a tongue you barely understand, accompanied by menacing glares and the occasional shove, would be your first lessons. You'd learn fast or suffer the consequences. And those consequences, you quickly realize, are not just a stern talking to or a note in your personnel file. They are physical, immediate, and designed to instill terror. The idea of personal space? That's a luxury for civilians. You're crammed into barracks with dozens of other recruits, sharing what little air there is, sleeping on the hard ground with little more than a thin blanket. The sense of being utterly alone, despite being surrounded by others, would be overwhelming. Your old life, your freedom, feels like a distant, fading dream. That raw, disorienting recruitment, that sudden, brutal awakening, is just the prelude. The moment you're clothed in that scratchy wool and shoved into line, your basic training begins, and it's nothing like the neatly organized motivational boot camps you might see in modern movies. There's no fancy obstacle course designed for teamwork, no inspiring speeches about camaraderie. This is a brutal, relentless ordeal designed to strip away everything you thought you knew about your body and mind, replacing it with pure, unthinking obedience and a terrifying capacity for violence. You're not being prepared for a marathon. You're being prepared to kill and to die on command. The first thing you'll notice, probably with aching muscles you didn't even know existed, is the marching. Oh, the marching. Not just a casual stroll, but forced marches, often for miles, carrying not a rucksack with your lunch, but a collection of heavy tools and weapons. You're taught a specific, grueling pace, the military pace designed for endurance and speed. You'd be expected to cover incredible distances, sometimes 20 miles or more in a day, often in full kit, under the relentless sun or through chilling rain. Imagine trying to keep up, your sandals chafing, your shoulders burning, all while a centurion barks threats from the rear, occasionally punctuating his words with a sharp jab from a vine staff. This isn't about getting your steps in for the day. It's about pushing your body to its absolute breaking point, then pushing it some more. Then come the drills. Endless, repetitive, mind-numbing drills. You'll spend hours, days, weeks practicing the same movements with your heavy scutum. The rectangular shield that feels like it weighs more than you do, and your gladius, the short, stabbing sword. Block, thrust, duck, turn, again and again. You'll learn how to form the testudo, the famous tortoise formation, where shields interlock above and around you, transforming the legion into an impenetrable, slow-moving tank. You'll practice spear throwing, javelin hurling, and even basic hand-to-hand combat. Every movement has to be precise, synchronized. If one man falters, the entire unit is vulnerable. This isn't about individual heroics. It's about becoming a perfectly functioning part of a larger, terrifying machine. Historians still argue whether the pilum, the heavy javelin, was primarily used for throwing or as a close-quarters weapon once its tip bent. But for you, it's just another heavy object to master. And then there's the digging. Oh, the digging. You might have thought being a soldier was all about glorious battles, but a significant portion of your training, and indeed your daily life, would involve wielding a pickaxe and shovel. You'd learn to dig ditches, build ramparts, and construct fortifications with astonishing speed and efficiency. This wasn't just physical labor, it was a core military skill. A legion on the march could, in a matter of hours, transform an open field into a defensible camp. You'd be taught to build roads, bridges, and even siege works. Your hands would be blistered, your back constantly aching, and your spirit, if it wasn't already broken, would be severely tested. You'd probably think back to that time you complained about mowing the lawn and wish you had that simple chore back. The discipline is unyielding. Forget questioning orders, even if they seem suicidal. A centurion's word is law, and defiance, even a momentary hesitation, is met with brutal swiftness. Flogging was common, and for serious offenses, crucifixion or decimation, the killing of 1 in 10 men in a disgraced unit were chilling possibilities. You learn to move, act, and even think in unison with your fellow recruits. Individuality is not tolerated. Conformity is survival. You learn to fear your officers almost as much as you might fear the enemy. Remember that odd Roman custom of officers wearing a crista or crest on their helmets. It wasn't just for show. It made them more visible, and therefore more intimidating, on the battlefield and in camp. It also made them a target, but hey, details. Sleep, when you get it, is rarely restful. You're exhausted, your body aches, and the constant noise of hundreds of other men, the braying of pack animals, and the ever-present demands of your trainers make true recuperation almost impossible. Your food would be coarse, but your appetite, sharpened by the grueling physical exertion, would make anything palatable. You'd probably dream of a soft bed and a warm meal, only to wake to the harsh reality of another dawn, another day of relentless training. You'd quickly realize that the Roman army wasn't just a fighting force. It was a factory, a relentless machine that consumed raw recruits and forged them, through pain and deprivation, into hardened, disciplined soldiers. And you, my friend, are firmly on that assembly line. You've survived the initial shock of recruitment and the mind-numbing agony of basic training, your muscles screaming in protest, your mind a foggy haze of exhaustion and commands. Now, you're no longer just a recruit, you're a legionary, or at least a potential one. And what does a Roman legionary do? He marches, endlessly. Your next challenge, and perhaps the most pervasive reality of a soldier's life, is the march. Endless miles, heavy gear. This isn't a stroll in the park with a light backpack. It's a forced endurance test that would break most modern athletes day after day, through every conceivable terrain and weather condition. Imagine this. You're up before dawn, the air still biting with the night's chill. Your breakfast, a meager portion of hardtack and watered wine, is wolfed down quickly, fueled more by necessity than appetite. Then the real fun begins. You're expected to carry an unbelievable load, often weighing upwards of 60 to 80 pounds. This isn't just your personal effects. This is your life, and the Legion's life, strapped to your back. First, there's your armor, a heavy larica segmentata, if you're lucky and it's later imperial period, or perhaps a larica hamata chainmail, which is even heavier, digging into your shoulders. Then comes your shield, the scutum, a bulky, curved piece of wood and leather that might feel like a small door. Your helmet, a metal bowl that becomes an oven in the sun and a freezing cap in winter, is likely either on your head or dangling from your pack. But wait, there's more. You also carry your weapons, your gladius, short sword, your pugio, dagger, and 2 pila javelins, each one weighing a fair bit. And it doesn't stop there. Roman soldiers were essentially self-sufficient. This means you're also burdened with tools. A pickaxe, a shovel, a wicker basket for carrying earth, a saw, a sickle, and a small leather bucket. You'd have a cooking pot, a water skin, a week's ration of grain, which you'd grind yourself, and perhaps even a spare tunic. All of this bundled onto a furca, a Y-shaped carrying pole that rests precariously on your shoulder. You become a walking supply train, a beast of burden. You'd probably look at a modern hiker with their lightweight gear and GPS and wonder what magical future they stumbled out of. Now, imagine carrying all of this not for a pleasant afternoon hike, but for 15 to 20 Roman miles a day, sometimes more, often in formation. That's roughly 14 to 18 modern miles, and sometimes they'd push for 25 or even 30 miles in extreme circumstances. You're not just walking. You're marching, keeping pace with hundreds, sometimes thousands of other men. You're trudging across dusty plains, through muddy swamps, up steep, rocky hills, and across icy rivers. There are no paved roads waiting for you. You often build them as you go, or march on rough, uneven terrain. Your sandals offer little comfort, and blisters become a constant, agonizing companion. The relentless sun beats down, or a chilling rain soaks you to the bone, turning your heavy wool tunic into a sodden, chafing torment. Historians still argue whether the caligae, the Roman army's studded sandals, were truly designed for comfort or primarily for grip and durability. But either way, your feet will feel every single mile. The physical toll would be immense. Exhaustion would be your baseline state. Every muscle in your body would ache constantly. Your shoulders would be perpetually bruised from the furka and armor straps. Dehydration would be a constant threat, and the dust you kick up, or the mud you churn, would coat every inch of you. There's no complaining, no slowing down. If you fall behind, you risk the wrath of your centurion, or worse, being left behind altogether, a lonely snack for wolves or local bandits. You quickly learn to push through the pain, to ignore the burning in your lungs, to simply put one foot in front of the other, even when every fiber of your being screams for you to stop. The psychological impact is just as profound. The monotony of the march, broken only by the aching discomfort, would be a special kind of torture. Your mind would probably drift, longing for the comforts you left behind, or perhaps just for a moment of quiet reprieve. But there is no quiet. There's the rhythmic slap of caligae on earth, the creak of leather and armor, the grunts and coughs of your fellow legionaries, and the constant barking orders. You'd become intimately familiar with the backs of the men in front of you, their individual rhythms, their little limps. And when you finally halt, usually at dusk, the day's work isn't over. Remember that quirky tidbit about Roman soldiers building a fortified camp every single night, even if they were only marching for one day? Well, get ready to grab your shovel. You've just endured another grueling march, the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples that you're too exhausted to appreciate. Your feet are throbbing, your shoulders are screaming, and all you want is to collapse. But the moment the order to halt is given, your day is far from over. This is where camp life, not your glamping trip, truly kicks in. Forget visions of pitching a quaint tent and roasting marshmallows. This is a military operation, repeated with astonishing precision every single night, designed for security and survival, not comfort. The Roman army's ability to construct a fortified camp, a castra, at the end of every day's march was one of its defining characteristics and a testament to its unparalleled discipline and engineering prowess. You, as a humble legionary, are a vital cog in this well-oiled machine. The moment you drop your pack, you immediately grab your tools, that pickaxe and shovel you've been lugging all day, and get to work. First, the perimeter is marked out, often in a perfect square or rectangle. Then, under the watchful eyes of centurions, you and your comrades begin digging. You're digging a ditch, a fossa, around the entire camp. This isn't a shallow groove. It's a substantial trench, often several feet deep and wide, designed to impede any potential attackers. The earth you excavate isn't simply discarded. It's used to construct an earthen rampart, a vallum, on the inside of the ditch. This rampart is then often topped with sharpened stakes or suits, which you've also been carrying. Imagine the sheer physical output required. Marching all day with 60 pounds of gear, then immediately spending hours digging and building fortifications. Your body would be constantly pushed to its limits, beyond anything you've ever experienced. You'd probably look at a modern-day construction worker and think, amateur, Once the basic fortifications are in place, the camp itself is erected. This involves pitching your leather tents, the pavilions which house 8 men, though it probably feels more like 4 sardines together. These tents are arranged in strict, orderly rows, forming streets and blocks. There's a central command tent, a praetorium for the commander, and areas for supplies, cavalry, and various other units. The entire layout is standardized, so any legionary, regardless of where they're from, knows exactly where everything is located. This meticulous organization was a hallmark of Roman military genius, something historians still argue was a more significant factor in their long-term success than any particular weapon or battle tactic. Life inside the camp is communal, rough, and entirely devoid of privacy. You're living cheek by jowl with 7 other men, sharing a confined space that smells of sweat, earth, and unwashed wool. There's no personal bathroom. You'd use communal latrines, which were often just trenches over which you squatted, hoping for the best in terms of hygiene. And speaking of hygiene, bathing would be a rare luxury, perhaps only when the legion was in permanent winter quarters or near a substantial water source. Most nights, a quick rinse or sponge bath would be the extent of your ablutions, leaving you perpetually gritty and smelling distinctly of soldier. You'd probably yearn for a hot shower more than a cold beer. Mealtime isn't a gourmet experience either. You'd be given a ration of grain, usually wheat, which you and your tentmates would have to grind into flour yourselves using a small hand mill. This flour would then be mixed with water to make a kind of rough bread or porridge, cooked over an open fire. Meat might be scarce, reserved for specific occasions or when foraging was successful. Vegetables would be whatever could be gathered or grown locally. It's sustenance, not enjoyment, designed to provide enough calories to keep you going, but certainly not to delight your palate. And you'd be eating it while squatting on the ground, often in the dim light of a flickering lamp, surrounded by the cacophony of hundreds of other men. Remember that quirky tidbit about Roman soldiers sometimes supplementing their diet with pulse, a simple grain porridge? Well, you'd be getting very, very familiar with pulse. As the night draws in, you'd pull your rough blanket tight, the sounds of the camp your lullaby, the distant calls of sentries, the restless stirrings of men, perhaps the occasional bray of a mule. Sleep would be fitful, broken by the cold, the hardness of the ground, and the knowledge that your shift on watch could come at any moment. You are always on duty, always on edge. This isn't glamping. It's a constant, exhausting cycle of labor, vigilance, and survival, cementing the reality that your life is no longer your own. The endless marching, the grueling camp construction, they've become your new normal. But even with a fortified castra and the promise of a rough meal, another fundamental aspect of Roman army life would constantly gnaw at you: food and water, a questionable feast. Forget your carefully curated grocery list or a trip to the nearest convenience store. Your diet would be monotonous, often unappetizing, and perpetually shadowed by concerns of scarcity and, frankly, what questionable things might be lurking within it. Your primary staple, day in and day out, would be grain. Usually wheat, sometimes barley. It would be issued to you as whole kernels. That means no pre-milled flour, no fancy bread loaves. You and your tentmates would be responsible for grinding it yourself, often with a small, portable hand mill, a laborious task after a full day of marching and digging. This coarsely ground flour would then be mixed with water and cooked over an open fire to form a basic bread or a thick porridge, known as pulse. Imagine eating that morning, noon, and night for weeks on end. Your taste buds would probably stage a full-scale revolt. This isn't just about blandness. It's about the sheer lack of variety that would lead to nutritional deficiencies over time, though your constant physical exertion would burn through calories at an alarming rate, making anything edible seem desirable. Meat was a luxury, not a given. If you were lucky, the legion might have herds of cattle or sheep following them, or perhaps you'd forage successfully in conquered territories. But fresh meat was often reserved for special occasions or distributed sparingly. More commonly, you might get salted pork or dried fish, tough and chewy, requiring significant rehydration and cooking to be palatable. Vegetables and fruits would depend entirely on what was available locally or what could be safely gathered. You'd quickly learn to identify edible plants, and just as quickly learn to regret eating the non-edible ones. Historians still argue about the exact composition of the Roman soldiers' diet across different regions and campaigns. Did they primarily subsist on grain, or did meat and vegetables play a more consistent role? For you, in the field, it would feel like a perpetual grain festival. And then there's water. Oh, sweet water. Access to clean, potable water was paramount for a marching army, and often a logistical nightmare. While Roman engineers were masters of aqueducts and sanitation in permanent settlements on campaign, you were reliant on local sources, rivers, streams, wells. You'd drink what was available, often unfiltered, often teeming with things you absolutely do not want in your digestive system. Dysentery and other waterborne illnesses were a constant threat, capable of decimating a legion faster than any enemy army. You'd learn to be grateful for any source, no matter how murky, and the thought of a cold, clean glass of water would be the stuff of dreams. Remember that quirky tidbit about Roman soldiers sometimes drinking pasca, a mixture of water and vinegar, to purify it and boost energy? It might sound strange, but you'd probably chug it down without a second thought if it meant avoiding the stomach cramps that could incapacitate you for days. The lack of consistent hygiene around food preparation would also be a major concern. Cooking over open fires with rudimentary utensils, in dusty or muddy conditions, and with hundreds of other men in close proximity, provided ample opportunities for contamination. Flies would be everywhere. Your hands, even after a cursory rinse, would still be grimy from digging and marching. Food would be exposed to the elements. You'd develop a robust immune system, or you'd succumb to illness. There's no food safety inspector checking temperatures or cross-contamination. It's a culinary free-for-all, where survival is the only gourmet experience. The psychological impact of this monotonous and often questionable diet shouldn't be underestimated. The constant hunger, the longing for something fresh, something different, would be a low hum of deprivation beneath all the physical exhaustion. You'd probably find yourself dreaming of familiar meals from your civilian life, only to wake up to the reality of another bowl of porridge. Your body would adapt, your tastes would dull, but the constant awareness of what you weren't eating would be a silent, nagging torment. And when you finally got a piece of fresh fruit or a morsel of roasted meat, it would feel like the greatest luxury imaginable. The ache in your feet from the march, the pervasive grittiness of camp life, the gnawing hunger for something beyond porridge, these are constant companions. But overriding all of them is an ever-present, bone-chilling fear, the fear of discipline and punishment. No room for error. In the Roman army, even the slightest deviation from the rules, a moment's hesitation, or a perceived act of insubordination could lead to consequences that would make your jaw drop and your blood run cold. This wasn't about timeouts or stern lectures. This was about absolute control, enforced with a brutality designed to instill unthinking obedience. The backbone of Roman military discipline was the centurion, the officer who lived and breathed with his men. He wasn't just a leader, he was an enforcer. Armed with his vitus, a vine staff, he was authorized to administer immediate physical punishment for minor infractions. Forget your modern concepts of human resources or due process. If you were slow, out of step, or simply looked at him the wrong way, a sharp crack across your back or legs with that staff would be your instant reminder to conform. Imagine trying to sleep at night, knowing that a misstep during tomorrow's drill could result in excruciating pain. This wasn't just about making you hurt. It was about conditioning you to react instantly, without question, to any command. More serious offenses, however, carried far more terrifying penalties. Flogging was a common, brutal punishment for theft, insubordination, or dereliction of duty. You'd be stripped, tied to a post, and beaten with rods or whips, often by your own comrades. A grim spectacle designed to break your spirit and serve as a horrifying example to others. The pain would be immense, the humiliation profound, and the physical scars would be a constant, visible reminder of your transgression. And let's be honest, you'd probably spend the next few weeks sleeping on your stomach, wishing you just kept your mouth shut. Then there was decimation, a word that still sends shivers down the spine. This was the ultimate collective punishment, reserved for units that had shown cowardice in battle, mutinied, or suffered a catastrophic defeat due to widespread dereliction of duty. Imagine this: your entire cohort, perhaps 480 men, is assembled. Every 10th man is selected by lot. These unfortunate souls are then beaten to death by their own comrades, often with clubs or stones. This wasn't just a punishment. It was a psychological weapon, a gruesome demonstration that the Legion valued its honor and discipline above individual lives. Historians still argue about the frequency with which decimation was actually carried out, but the very threat of it, the chilling knowledge that your survival could depend on a random draw, would be enough to keep you terrified and compliant. Desertion, mutiny, or severe cowardice in the face of the enemy could lead to execution. This might involve beheading, crucifixion, a particularly slow and agonizing death, or being thrown from the Tarpeian Rock. These were public, terrifying spectacles, meant to reinforce the absolute authority of Rome and the dire consequences of betrayal. The concept of military justice was swift, harsh, and utterly unforgiving. There were no appeals, no parole boards, just the chilling finality of the Legion's judgment. Remember that quirky tidbit about Roman soldiers sometimes having tattoos as a form of identification? Well, a deserter caught with one might find it brutally removed, adding insult to horrific injury. The constant threat of these punishments would permeate every moment of your existence. It wasn't just about avoiding a flogging. It was about living in a state of perpetual vigilance, ensuring every action, every word, was in line with legionary expectations. You'd learn to suppress any rebellious thoughts, to stifle any complaints, to simply become an automaton of obedience. This wasn't just discipline. It was a system of psychological terror designed to strip you of your free will and turn you into a perfectly controllable instrument of Roman power. You'd probably find yourself thinking that your boss's passive-aggressive emails aren't so bad after all. You've endured the lash of discipline, the endless marches, the questionable meals. But what happens when the inevitable strikes, when your body, already pushed beyond its limits, decides to betray you? This brings us to medical care. Hope for the best, but expect the worst. Forget the sterile environments of modern hospitals, the miracle drugs, the advanced surgical techniques. In the Roman army, even a simple cut could be a death sentence, and a serious injury meant you were essentially on your own. Imagine this scenario: you've tripped during a drill, or perhaps a rogue branch has scraped your leg during a march. It's a deep gash, bleeding freely. Your immediate thought might be of infection, and you'd be absolutely right to worry. Roman understanding of germ theory was, to put it mildly, non-existent. They knew that wounds often festered, but attributed it to bad air or other mysterious forces, not the invisible armies of bacteria. So, your wound might be cleaned with water that's far from sterile, or perhaps a poultice of herbs might be applied, some effective, many utterly useless, and some potentially harmful. The instruments used by a legionary medic, a capsarius, would be rudimentary. Bronze scalpels, forceps, needles. They would likely be reused, carrying unseen contaminants from one patient to the next. For more serious injuries, like a broken bone or a deep stab wound from a training accident or later actual combat, your chances plummeted dramatically. Setting a complex fracture without anesthesia or proper sterilization would be agonizing beyond belief, and the risk of infection, gangrene, and subsequent amputation was terrifyingly high. Amputations, when performed, were crude affairs, often leading to massive blood loss and shock. You'd probably wake up sweating in the night, just imagining the blunt pain of such a procedure. Illness was an even more insidious killer than battle. Fevers, dysentery, remember that questionable water? Malaria and various other contagions swept through legions like wildfire, especially when camped in swampy areas or during long sieges. Hundreds, sometimes thousands, of men could be laid low by disease, their bodies weakened by malnutrition and constant exertion, making them prime targets. There were no antibiotics, no vaccines, no intravenous fluids. Treatment would largely consist of rest, simple remedies, and prayer. A bad cough could turn into pneumonia, a stomach bug into a fatal dehydration. Historians still argue about whether disease or combat caused more Roman military casualties. For you, caught in the midst of a spreading fever, that debate would feel utterly academic. While the Roman army did have a medical corps, the valetudinarium or field hospital, these facilities were often rudimentary, especially on campaign. They were essentially large tents or temporary structures where the wounded and sick were gathered. The quality of care would vary wildly depending on the skill of the medici, doctors, and the resources available. Some Roman doctors were highly skilled for their time, capable of complex surgeries like cataract removal or trepanning, drilling holes in the skull. But these were exceptions. The average legionary medic was probably more of a first aid provider, patching up minor cuts and setting simple breaks. Remember that quirky tidbit about Roman surgeons using special instruments to remove arrows without causing further damage? While impressive, it highlights that the emphasis was often on treating immediate trauma rather than systemic illness or preventing infection. The psychological toll of knowing that your life could end not from a glorious battle, but from a persistent cough or a festering blister, would be immense. You'd witness your comrades succumbing to ailments that modern medicine could cure with a simple pill. You'd learn to fear the chills of a fever more than the glint of an enemy's sword. And if you were incapacitated, unable to march or fight, you'd become a burden, a drain on precious resources. While the Roman army was known for its pragmatic approach, soldiers too ill or injured to ever recover might simply be left behind, or, in harsher times, disposed of. Your only real hope was your own resilience, and perhaps a touch of blind luck. You've endured the relentless discipline, the agonizing marches, the meager rations, and the constant threat of illness or untreatable injury. You've been broken down and rebuilt, your civilian self a fading memory. Now, all that training, all that suffering, is about to culminate in the very reason you exist as a legionary. Combat, face to face with death. This isn't the clean, distant warfare of modern times, fought with drones and precision strikes. This is brutal, visceral, hand-to-hand fighting. A chaotic, terrifying maelstrom where survival is fleeting and often a matter of pure, blind luck. Imagine the tension leading up to a battle. The nervous energy in the camp, the hushed conversations, the sharpening of swords. You'd probably be trying to eat something, anything, but your stomach would be a knot of fear. Then the trumpet blast, the assembly. You'd form up with your cohort, your century, your eyes scanning the ranks, seeing the same fear reflected in the faces of your comrades. The air would be filled with the rhythmic thud of thousands of marching feet, the clang of armor, and the ominous chants that the legions used to intimidate the enemy and steel their own resolve. You'd probably feel a strange mix of terror and a desperate urge to simply get it over with. As you advance, the enemy line would come into view, a swirling mass of unfamiliar faces, strange banners, and a cacophony of their own war cries. Then the javelins. This is where your pilum comes into play. You'd hurl your heavy javelin, designed to penetrate shields and then bend, making them useless for the enemy to throw back. The air would thicken with these flying projectiles, a whistling, deadly rain. You'd hear the thud of impact, the screams of the hit, and the terrifying realization that this is real, undeniably real. You'd instinctively raise your scutum, tucking behind its protective bulk, praying that no stray pilum finds your exposed flesh. Historians still argue whether the pilum was primarily a disruptor, meant to force the enemy to drop their shields, or a purely lethal projectile, but for you, it's just another terrifying missile. Then comes the clash. The impact is staggering. The front ranks smash into each other, a jarring collision of flesh, wood, and metal. There's no finesse here, no grand strategy in the immediate melee. It's a pushing, shoving, stabbing, hacking match. You're using your scutum not just to block, but to shove, to punch, to create an opening. Your gladius, short and sharp, is designed for thrusting, not slashing. You're looking for gaps in the enemy's defenses, a soft spot, a moment of weakness. You're stabbing, pulling back, stabbing again, often aiming for the belly or groin, the most vulnerable, unprotected areas. You'd probably quickly learn that the romanticized image of sword fighting in stories is a far cry from the brutal, exhausting reality. The sounds would be overwhelming. The metallic clang of swords on shields, the guttural roars of men, the screams of pain, the sickening thud of a blade finding its mark. The smells would be just as horrific. Sweat, blood, fear, and the metallic tang of fresh death. You'd be fighting shoulder to shoulder with your comrades, your lives depending on each other's steadfastness. If the man next to you falls, a gap opens, leaving you vulnerable. You'd be hyper-aware of the crush of bodies, the weight of the enemy pressing in, the constant threat from all sides. It's a claustrophobic, terrifying experience. The battlefield is a place of sheer chaos, but within that chaos, the Legion maintained its discipline. Even as men fell, others would step forward to fill the gaps, maintaining the integrity of the line. You'd be trained to fight as a unit, to rely on the man beside you, to trust the centurion's commands even when all hell was breaking loose around you. Remember that quirky tidbit about Roman soldiers using shouting and organized noise to terrify opponents? It wasn't just for them. It was to drown out the screams of your own dying comrades. The goal wasn't individual glory. It was the victory of the Legion, achieved through relentless pressure and unwavering formation. Every moment is a struggle for survival, a desperate dance with death where your training is your only prayer. And you, friend, are right in the thick of it. You've survived the terrifying maelstrom of direct combat, the clang of steel, the screams, the all-consuming fear. But not all conflicts are fought on open fields with swift, decisive clashes. Sometimes, the enemy is holed up behind walls, and that's when you're introduced to the slow, grinding, soul-crushing reality of siege warfare. A slow, grimy hell. This isn't a quick skirmish. This is a war of attrition, where boredom, disease, and backbreaking labor are as lethal as any enemy sword. Imagine setting up camp, not for a single night, but for weeks, months, or even years. The fortified castra you're building now isn't temporary. It's a permanent settlement designed to withstand counterattacks and the harsh realities of a prolonged encampment. You'd be part of an immense construction effort, building circumvallation lines, vast networks of ditches and ramparts completely encircling the enemy city, preventing anyone from entering or leaving. You might even build contravallation lines, an inner ring of defenses, to protect against sorties from the besieged city and attacks from any relieving armies outside. This isn't just digging. It's engineering on a massive scale, transforming the landscape into an intricate, deadly trap. You'd probably find yourself thinking that building your garden fence was quite the architectural feat back home. The daily routine would be a brutal mix of manual labor and constant vigilance. You'd be digging, chopping wood, moving stones, constructing siege engines like ballistas and onagers, giant catapults, and building massive siege towers. These towers, often towering over the city walls, had to be constructed piece by laborious piece, sometimes under a hail of projectiles from the defenders. It's physically exhausting work, performed under the constant threat of enemy arrows, sling bullets, or even boiling oil pouring down from the walls. Every clang of a hammer, every shovelful of dirt, is a target. Historians still argue whether the Roman onager truly hurled stones or primarily flaming projectiles. For you, it's just another terrifying machine that requires endless hours of backbreaking assembly. Life during a siege is characterized by a pervasive sense of grime and stagnation. You're living in a semi-permanent camp, often in increasingly unsanitary conditions. Fresh water becomes scarce or contaminated. Food, already monotonous, becomes even more so as supplies dwindle. Disease, as you've already experienced, thrives in crowded, unhygienic environments. Dysentery and other camp fevers would sweep through the ranks, claiming more lives than the actual fighting. You'd witness men wasting away, coughing their last breaths, not in glorious combat, but in a squalid tent far from home. Remember that quirky tidbit about Roman soldiers sometimes having to use special filters made of cloth for their drinking water during sieges? You'd be desperately trying to improvise one of those, hoping it would make a difference. The psychological toll would be immense. The endless waiting, the slow progress, the constant awareness of the enemy just beyond the walls, watching, waiting. The boredom would be punctuated by sudden, terrifying moments of danger. A sally from the city gates, an attempt to sabotage your siege works, or a volley of arrows raining down on your position. Sleep would be fitful, haunted by the distant shouts from the city, the clang of your own engineers, and the ever-present gnawing anxiety. You'd probably develop a morbid fascination with the daily progress of the siege, hoping for any sign that it might end, one way or another. When the final assault comes, it's a terrifying crescendo of the grind. You're part of the storming party, pushing scaling ladders against the walls, or rushing through a breach created by a ram. The fighting is intense, claustrophobic, and utterly brutal. You're climbing over rubble, dodging falling stones, and engaging in desperate hand-to-hand combat in narrow confines. The exhilaration of a breach might momentarily overcome the exhaustion, but it quickly gives way to the savage reality of urban warfare. And even if the city falls, your work isn't over. There's the grim task of securing the city, looting, and often the brutal aftermath of conquest. This isn't a glorious charge. It's a sustained, suffocating hell, proving that victory often comes not from strength, but from sheer, stubborn endurance. You've seen the face of combat, survived the protracted misery of a siege, and now, as the dust settles, a different reality begins to sink in, the cold, hard truth about your prospects. This is pay and prospects, not a lucrative career. Forget dreams of becoming a wealthy entrepreneur or retiring to a life of leisure. Your life as a Roman legionary offered meager wages and a distant, uncertain hope of retirement that hardly seemed worth the daily grind and constant brush with death. Let's talk about your pay, your stipendium. It was shockingly low. While the exact amounts varied over centuries and according to rank, a basic legionary's annual pay was often around 225 denarii during the early Principate, later increasing. This sounds like a sum, perhaps, until you realize that much of it was immediately deducted. You had to pay for your food rations. Remember that coarse grain you're grinding yourself? your equipment, your clothing, and even burial expenses in case you didn't make it. So, a significant portion, sometimes even half or more of your nominal pay, never even touched your hands. It was a managed economy designed to keep you beholden to the legion. You'd probably glance at your comrades, wondering if they also felt like they were working for free minus the free food. What little remained was often not paid out in regular increments, but perhaps in 3 annual installments. This meant long periods with virtually no cash in hand, forcing you to rely on credit or simply doing without. Forget saving up for that villa back home. Most of what you earned was just enough to cover the bare necessities, and sometimes not even that. Remember that quirky tidbit about Roman soldiers often having to borrow money from their centurions or comrades. This wasn't just a casual loan. It was often a necessity to cover unexpected expenses, or just to get by until the next meager payday. The notion of discretionary income was probably a foreign concept to you. Beyond the cash, there were occasional donatives, special payments from the emperor or a victorious general, often given upon accession to the throne or after a major victory. These were certainly welcome, a bonus in an otherwise dismal financial landscape, but they were irregular and entirely at the whim of the commander or emperor. They were also often used to secure loyalty, a reminder that your livelihood depended entirely on the continued success and goodwill of those in power. Historians still argue about the true value of a legionary's pay, trying to calculate its purchasing power against civilian wages of the time, but the consensus is generally that it offered subsistence, not wealth. And then there are your prospects, the hazy dream of retirement or onesta missio. This was the ultimate goal, the light at the end of a very long, dark tunnel. You would typically sign up for 20, sometimes 25 years of service, later even more. Imagine committing to 2 decades of what you've already experienced, knowing that every single day could be your last. And even if you miraculously survived, retirement wasn't guaranteed. You had to complete your full term of service and not be discharged for disability or misconduct. If you did make it, the rewards for your long, arduous service were primarily a lump sum of money, often significantly more than your annual pay, and, crucially, a plot of land. This land, often in a newly conquered or settled territory, was meant to provide you with a means of livelihood in your old age. It was a powerful incentive, a promise of stability after a life of constant upheaval. But imagine trying to cultivate a plot of land with a body broken by decades of marching, fighting, and manual labor. Your back would be perpetually stiff, your joints aching, and your hands calloused beyond repair. You'd likely be suffering from chronic injuries, lingering illnesses, and the psychological scars of war. The idea of a comfortable, peaceful retirement, gently rocking on your porch swing, was probably a fantasy. Instead, you'd likely be toiling on your small farm, trying to eke out a living, perhaps alongside other grizzled veterans. Your social circle would largely consist of other former soldiers, for who else could truly understand the nightmares you'd seen and the life you'd lived? The pay was low, the work was brutal, and the promised land, if you ever reached it, came at an immeasurable cost to your body and soul. You've marched through countless landscapes, fought in brutal battles, and suffered through the monotonous, often unsanitary, daily grind. But as a legionary, you weren't just fighting foreign armies. You were constantly immersed in foreign lands and cultures, which brings us to cultural clashes. Strangers in strange lands. This wasn't just about different languages or customs. It was about navigating a world where every local interaction could be fraught with misunderstanding, suspicion, or outright hostility, adding another layer of pervasive stress to your already grueling existence. Imagine being deployed to Britannia, a cold, rainy island far from the warmth of the Mediterranean, populated by painted warriors and speaking a guttural language you barely comprehend. Or perhaps you're sent to the deserts of Mesopotamia, where the heat is oppressive, the water scarce, and the local tribes fiercely independent. You are Rome's instrument of expansion, but to the locals you are an invader, a symbol of unwelcome occupation. Your presence alone often sparks resentment, even if overt rebellion isn't immediately visible. You'd probably find yourself thinking that learning Latin was hard enough. Now you have to figure out what "foreigner go home" sounds like in a dozen different dialects. The most immediate challenge would be the language barrier. While Latin was the language of the legion, the vast majority of the people you encountered, especially outside major Romanized cities, spoke their own native tongues. Simple communication for necessities, food, water, directions, would be a struggle. Orders to locals, often delivered with gestures and frustrated shouts, could easily be misinterpreted, leading to friction. This lack of understanding wasn't just inconvenient. It could be dangerous, escalating minor disagreements into violent confrontations. Historians still argue about the extent to which Roman soldiers learned local languages. Some certainly did, especially those in administrative roles, but for the average legionary, communication would have been minimal and often aggressive. Then there are the customs and traditions. Everything from how people dressed, ate, worshipped, or even greeted each other would be alien. What you considered normal, they might find offensive, and vice versa. You might unknowingly violate a sacred custom, insult a local deity, or inadvertently trespass on revered ground. These cultural faux pas, unintentional as they might be, could quickly turn locals against you, making your deployment even more precarious. You'd witness rituals that seemed bizarre, food preparations that made your stomach churn, and social hierarchies that made no sense. Remember that quirky tidbit about Roman soldiers sometimes adopting local deities or wearing foreign amulets for protection. It wasn't just curiosity. It was often a pragmatic attempt to fit in, or at least avoid offending the local spirits. The local populations themselves would view you with a mix of fear, resentment, and perhaps a grudging respect for Roman power. They might cooperate out of necessity, or actively resist in the shadows. You'd constantly be on edge, wondering if that seemingly friendly farmer was actually a rebel scout, or if the food you were offered was poisoned. Skirmishes with local insurgents, banditry, and punitive expeditions against rebellious villages would be a regular, brutal part of your service. There's no clear front line when the enemy is everywhere and indistinguishable from the civilian. Even within your own legion, there would be ethnic and cultural diversity. While the core of the legions might have been Italian, as the empire expanded, more and more soldiers were recruited from the provinces. You could be serving alongside men from Gaul, Syria, Egypt, or Spain, each with their own regional accents, customs, and temperaments. While the military machine strove to homogenize you all into Romans, these differences would still exist, sometimes leading to internal tensions or rivalries within your own ranks. The Roman army, for all its unity, was a melting pot, often simmering with unacknowledged differences. You'd learn to discern the subtle nuances between a Gallic grunt of approval and a Syrian one, or at least try to. This constant immersion in unfamiliar environments, coupled with the underlying hostility, would contribute to a profound sense of isolation, even when surrounded by thousands of your own men. You are an alien in a foreign land, perpetually an outsider, always on guard. Your world shrinks to the immediate confines of your legion, your century, your tent mates, because outside that bubble, chaos and danger, often born of cultural misunderstanding, constantly lurk. You've been immersed in alien cultures, constantly vigilant against unseen threats, and pushed to the brink by physical hardship. But beneath all these external pressures, there's an internal force, more pervasive and absolute than any other, that dictates your every breath, your every action. The chain of command. Absolute obedience. In the Roman army, questioning orders simply isn't an option. Dissent is severely punished, and your life, quite literally, depends on instantaneous, unthinking compliance. From the moment you're press-ganged into service, you learn that your individuality is stripped away, replaced by your role within a rigid hierarchy. At the bottom, there's you, the common legionary, a nameless cog in a vast military machine. Above you are your immediate superiors, the decurion for your small squad of 10, and then the omnipresent centurion, the backbone of the legion. This isn't a suggestion box kind of relationship. It's a direct conduit for orders that must be obeyed without hesitation. The centurion's word is law, backed by the ever-present threat of his vitus or more severe punishments. You learn to anticipate his every gesture, his every shout, because even a momentary lapse in attention could have dire consequences. Above the centurions are the tribunes, often younger men from aristocratic families, gaining military experience. They might not be as intimately involved in your daily grind, but their authority is unquestionable. Then come the legates, commanders of individual legions, and finally, the emperor himself or a provincial governor acting in his stead, holding ultimate authority over life and death. This chain of command is unbroken, crystal clear, and designed for maximum efficiency and control. Orders flow down, absolute obedience flows up. There's no room for debate, no space for personal opinion. You are not paid to think, you are paid to obey. You'd probably find yourself thinking that your childhood chores suddenly seem like a masterclass in negotiation compared to this. This absolute obedience wasn't just about making the army function smoothly. It was a deeply ingrained philosophy. The Roman military understood that in the chaos of battle, hesitation or independent action could be fatal to the entire unit. Drill and discipline instilled a Pavlovian response. Command given, action taken instantly. You were trained to move as one, to respond as one, to become a collective entity rather than a group of individuals. Historians still argue whether this rigid command structure stifled innovation or was precisely what allowed Rome to maintain its military dominance for centuries. For you, it's simply the unyielding reality of your daily existence. Any perceived challenge to this authority, no matter how small, was met with swift and brutal reprisal. A grumble under your breath, a slow response to an order, an argument with a superior, these could escalate rapidly from a flogging to a demotion, or even to a death sentence. Mutiny, the ultimate act of defiance, was unthinkable, punished with decimation and the complete disbandment of the offending unit. The message was clear. Rome demanded absolute loyalty, and dissent would not merely be punished, it would be eradicated. Remember that quirky tidbit about Roman soldiers swearing a solemn oath, the sacramentum, upon enlistment, pledging unwavering loyalty to their commander and Rome? This wasn't just a formality. It was a profound religious and legal commitment that bound you to this unbreakable chain. The psychological impact of living under such constant, inescapable authority would be immense. You'd learn to suppress your own desires, your own will. Your life is not your own. It belongs to the legion and through the legion to Rome. You are always under observation, always accountable. This creates a pervasive sense of powerlessness, where your survival is entirely dependent on your ability to follow orders, even those that seem suicidal. Your only recourse is unwavering compliance, a silent acceptance of your role. And in this terrifying system, your identity slowly erodes, replaced by the collective identity of the legionary, a disciplined, silent, and obedient weapon in the hands of the ultimate power. You've internalized the brutal logic of the chain of command, your will subsumed by the legion's demands. But even with that iron discipline, another immense burden weighs on you, a profound sense of temporal and spatial displacement. Long campaigns, far from home forever. Forget weekend trips or annual vacations. Your military service means years, often decades, spent hundreds or thousands of miles from where you were born, disconnected from your family, your culture, and the familiar comforts of your former life. Imagine enlisting or being forced into service at a young age, perhaps in your late teens or early 20s. The Roman army typically required 20 or 25 years of service, later even more. Think about that for a moment. 2 entire decades. That's longer than many people live in one place today. For you, it means leaving behind your parents, your siblings, perhaps a sweetheart or a young family, with no certainty of ever seeing them again. Communication was slow, unreliable, and often non-existent. A letter might take months to reach its destination, if it ever did, and often you'd have no way of knowing if your loved ones were even still alive. You are, in every practical sense, cut off from your past. You'd probably find yourself staring at the stars on a clear night, wondering if the same constellations were visible over your distant homeland. Your life becomes an endless journey across the vast Roman Empire, and sometimes beyond its borders. One year you might be slogging through the cold, damp forests of Germania. The next you could be baking in the scorching sun of Egypt, or enduring the endless dust of Syria. You are a tool of Roman expansion and defense, constantly moved, constantly deployed. These are not tourist trips. They are punishing movements from one theater of war or occupation to another. Each new region presents its own unique challenges. Different climates, foreign languages, alien customs, and often new enemies. Historians still argue about the precise travel times and logistical feats required to move legions across the empire. For you, it simply meant perpetual displacement. This prolonged absence would have profound effects on your personal life. If you had a family, they would grow up without you. Children would be born and mature into adults, parents would age and pass away, all without your presence. The connections that defined your civilian life would fray, then break entirely. While some soldiers might have married local women in the provinces where they were stationed, these marriages were often not legally recognized until later periods, and the children often faced uncertain futures. You are a ruthless warrior, loyal only to the eagle's standard. Remember that quirky tidbit about Roman soldiers sometimes leaving behind carved dedications or graffiti at their distant posts, almost as if to mark their passage or loneliness. It's a small, poignant testament to the human need to leave a trace, even when far from home. The concept of home itself would become increasingly abstract. Is it the place you were born, which you haven't seen in decades? Or is it the legion, the only constant in your nomadic, brutal existence? Your comrades become your surrogate family, the only people who truly understand the unique horrors and camaraderie of your shared life. Their survival becomes intrinsically linked to yours, and their deaths would hit with a particular kind of gut-wrenching pain, for they are the only family you have left. The thought of retirement, of finally returning home, would become a distant, shimmering mirage. Even if you survived your long years of service and were discharged, the idea of truly going home might be a complicated one. Would your family even recognize you? Would you recognize the place you left behind? The world would have moved on without you, and you would be a stranger in your own land, profoundly changed by a lifetime of violence and hardship. The Roman army provided you with a purpose, an identity, and a means of survival, but it did so by taking everything else. You are a citizen of Rome, yes, but your true citizenship is to the road, the camp, and the perpetual, unchanging burden of being a soldier, far from everything and everyone you once held dear. You've traversed the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Roman Empire, your life an endless cycle of marching, fighting, and enduring, all while severed from the roots of your past. If, against all odds, you've managed to survive the battles, the diseases, the brutal discipline, and the sheer physical toll of decades of service, you finally arrive at the tantalizing yet complex concept of retirement. If you even made it. This isn't a celebratory parade. It's a transition fraught with its own unique challenges, a return to a world you barely recognize, as a person profoundly changed. After 20, 25, or even more years of continuous military service, the day finally arrives. Your onesta missio, your honorable discharge. It's a moment you've probably dreamed of endlessly, a flicker of hope that kept you going through the darkest nights and the bloodiest battles. You are presented with your discharge papers, often engraved on bronze tablets, a tangible proof of your long service and Roman citizenship, if you weren't already one. This could feel like a burden lifting, a heavy weight finally removed from your shoulders. You'd probably feel a strange mix of exhilaration and disorientation, like waking from a very long, vivid dream. The primary benefits of your retirement, as you recall from Section 10, were a lump sum of money and, most importantly, a plot of land. This land was often provided in a newly settled or conquered territory, perhaps in a distant province like Gaul or Africa, rather than your original home. Imagine being given a piece of raw land, perhaps still forested or untilled, and being expected to transform it into a functioning farm. Your hands, accustomed to holding a gladius or a shovel for fortifications, now need to learn the delicate art of agriculture, often in unfamiliar soil and climate. You might have been a farmer before you joined, but decades of military life would have dulled those skills, replacing them with a warrior's instincts. Historians still argue whether these land grants were always fertile and viable, or often marginal and difficult to cultivate. But for you, it's a blank slate requiring immense effort. Physical ailments would be a constant companion. Your body, already a testament to enduring hardship, would bear the scars of countless minor injuries, old wounds that ache in the cold, and chronic pains from years of carrying heavy loads and fighting. Your hearing might be diminished from the clang of battle, your eyes tired from constant vigilance. You might limp or have a permanently stiff joint. Forget the image of a spry old man enjoying his golden years. You are a walking monument to a lifetime of brutal service, and every morning would bring a fresh chorus of aches and pains. You'd probably think back to those vigorous training sessions and wonder how you ever managed it. The psychological scars, however, might be even deeper. Decades of living with constant threats, of witnessing horrific violence, of being dehumanized by brutal discipline, would leave an indelible mark on your mind. You've been trained to kill, to obey without question, to suppress emotion. How do you simply turn that off and become a peaceful farmer, a quiet neighbor? The sounds of normal life might seem dull after the roar of battle, or worse, trigger traumatic memories. You might struggle with nightmares, with sudden outbursts of anger, or with a profound sense of detachment. You are a veteran, a survivor, but survival often comes at a cost to your soul. Remember that quirky tidbit about Roman veterans sometimes forming their own communities, coloniae, in the provinces? This wasn't just about practical land distribution. It was also a form of social cohesion, placing battle-hardened men together who understood each other's experiences, perhaps a necessary buffer from a civilian world that couldn't comprehend what they'd endured. Reintegrating into civilian society would be a massive cultural shift. The rules of civilian life are different. Disputes are resolved with words, not swords. You have to make your own decisions, manage your own time, think for yourself, skills that were actively suppressed during your service. Your social circle might shrink, limited to other veterans who share your unique experiences. You are a relic of a different world, a walking ghost of Rome's military might, trying to find your place in a society that values peace, order, and family, aspects that were sacrificed for the glory of the empire. The idea of going home becomes a complex negotiation, a quiet struggle to redefine yourself beyond the uniform. You've made it. You've walked away from the legions, a ghost of your former self, carrying the invisible wounds of decades of service. The land, the meager pension, They are yours if you can still claim them. But the truth is, the Roman army never truly leaves you. This final chapter isn't about dramatic battles or grand campaigns. It's about the aftermath, lingering scars. These are the marks etched deep into your body and soul, the constant reminders of a life spent in Rome's unforgiving service, long after the gladius has been laid down and the uniform shed. Your body, as you discovered in retirement, is a map of every march, every drill, every wound. The chronic pain in your knees from endless miles under a heavy pack, the persistent ache in your shoulders from the furca, the phantom itch of old scars from a pilum or a gladius strike, perhaps a limp that never quite goes away, a hand that trembles from a nervous tremor, or a persistent cough that settled in during a particularly damp siege. Simple tasks that civilians take for granted, like bending down, lifting heavy objects, or even just standing for too long, become arduous reminders of the toll your body has paid. You might find yourself unconsciously tensing at sudden loud noises, a reflex honed by years of living on the edge of combat. Your physical discomfort is a constant companion, a dull background hum to your every waking moment. You'd probably find yourself thinking that a modern chiropractor could make a fortune with you. But it's the invisible scars that truly define your aftermath, the psychological burden of war. You've witnessed unimaginable brutality, inflicted and received. You've seen comrades die in gruesome ways. You've killed, probably many times, and perhaps without remorse at the time. But the memories, like unwelcome shadows, linger. You might suffer from sleepless nights, haunted by the screams of battle or the faces of the fallen. Sudden flashes of anger, a hair-trigger temper honed by years of survival instincts, could make civilian interactions difficult. You've been trained to be vigilant, to see threats everywhere, to distrust outsiders. How do you switch off that finely tuned survival mechanism when the greatest threat now is simply the quiet monotony of civilian life? Historians still debate the extent of what we now call PTSD in ancient soldiers. For you, it's not an academic concept, it's your daily reality, a quiet torment. The constant sense of disconnection is another profound scar. You've lived a life utterly distinct from that of the civilians around you. They cannot comprehend the camaraderie forged in shared suffering, the absolute loyalty demanded by the legion, or the sheer horror of a battle. Your stories, if you even chose to tell them, would fall on deaf ears or worse, be met with discomfort. You are an outsider in your own society, and perhaps the only people who truly understand you are other veterans, grizzled men with haunted eyes who share your silent language of experience. This social isolation, the feeling of being fundamentally different, would be a quiet ache in your soul. Your sense of purpose has been irrevocably altered. For decades, your purpose was clear: serve Rome, obey orders, survive. Now, without the structure of the legion, without the immediate threat of combat, you might feel a profound emptiness. The mundane tasks of farming or craftwork might seem trivial after the high stakes of warfare. You were a part of something immense, a cog in a world-conquering machine. Now, you are just one individual trying to scratch out a living in a quiet corner of the empire. This loss of identity, this grappling with a civilian self that feels alien, would be a lifelong struggle. And finally, there's the lingering shadow of Rome. Even retired, you remain a subject of the emperor, bound by laws and occasionally called upon if needed. Your life of service has branded you, not just with tattoos or scars, but with an indelible connection to the vast, impersonal power that consumed your youth. You are a product of the Roman military machine, and even in peace, its echoes resonate within you. The sounds you hear now in your quiet rural setting might blend into the background, but the echoes of trumpets, the clang of steel, the shouts of centurions, and the cries of the wounded will forever play in the theater of your mind. You wouldn't have lasted a day in the Roman army, not as your current self. You would have been broken, remade, and left with an existence defined by the Empire's insatiable hunger for conquest. As the last echoes of the distant battlefield fade, the silence of your room begins to settle around you. The images of ancient discipline and relentless marches soften, blurring at the edges. Let the weight of that imagined struggle lift from your shoulders, replaced by the familiar comfort of your bed. The grittiness of the Roman camp, the chill of the early morning guard duty, they dissipate like mist at dawn. Allow your breathing to deepen, to slow, becoming a gentle rhythm. Think of the vastness of time, how truly distant those lives and struggles now are, how safe and warm you are in this moment. The stories of endurance, of hardship, are now just whispers in the quiet of your mind. Feel the softness of your pillow, the warmth of your blanket. Let your thoughts drift, light as a feather, away from the weight of history. The Roman legions are far, far away, marching into the dreams of the past. There's only peace now. Sleep well, my friend.